Hey everybody, Tim Adams again with you, and this week we've got quite a show for you. We are going to build live on air with you and our select group of team members here um, an audio-visual system for a small church, and we're defining small church as 100 members or less. So this is going to be audio system, visual system, like a video system with cameras, live streaming, projector, or a projection system and a lighting system. So we've budgeted an hour and a half for this, so we'll see if we can't hit that mark. And with that, I am going to just jump right into a screen share here and show you where we're going to be starting. So let me scroll up to the top here. So I've gone ahead and I've created a template, if you will, of a bill of materials for an AV system. So we've got our audio section here, projection, lighting, video, and live streaming. So the reason that I have split these two out is because not every church is going to be interested in live streaming, and so it doesn't make sense to just throw that all in the same category. So I tend to like, to do things in a linear fashion, so we're just going to start off with speakers. And here's what a lot of volunteers that have been asked to create a proposal for a new audio system or whatever, this is where they start. They go to Google and they type in speakers, right? Because they don't know that it's called AV speakers or PA speakers. And so then they start looking at stuff like Best Buy and Amazon.com, and they say, oh, Bose, I recognize Bose. I mean, that's a good name, right? Car speakers. So first off, we need to understand the terminology is important when you're doing a Google search, because utilizing the correct name of the equipment that you're looking for is going to yield you better, more accurate results. So for instance, we type in PA speakers, all of a sudden we're getting automatically, right off the top, better results. Sweetwater is a professional AV supplier, much like Full Compass and B&H. So, and you can see that just scrolling down, we're definitely getting the results that we want. I do want to take a moment and talk about manufacturer reputation, because it is important. You'll notice that we get stuff from Behringer, Yamaha, JBL, PV, and if you've been around, these are recognizable names, QSC, and there is something of a hierarchy to the quality, and it generally follows price. So for example, you have a PV here for $299.99. Okay, that's a 10-inch two-way, whereas a 10-inch two-way from JBL is $399, and a 10-inch two-way from QSC is $699. And there's a reason for that. A lot of that has to do with the materials that are used, how the unit is constructed, and a whole bunch of technical details that you're not necessarily going to know right off the top of your head. Now, I'm not going to actually say, well, these are the speakers you have to have, because with audio stuff, rooms have their own acoustics, and so there is no, get these speakers for your room because that's going to work. So I'm actually going to just throw this out to the group and see what they have to say. So let me throw it out to Charles first. Charles, do you know what kind of speakers you have in your church?
Not offhand. I've looked at them once before, but I've since way forgotten the brand name of them.
All right, that's fair. Anybody else want to chime in? Do they know off the top of their head what they got?
Ours are EV right now.
Okay, EV, Electro Voice. Excellent. That's a good brand. It's a good brand.
No, I think it starts with P instead. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong one. Yeah, PV.
PV, yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I can at least speak to, we have a monitor speaker that faces back towards the podium, and it's a PV. I mean, it's pretty obvious, you know, the big PV logo on it. It's our front of house speakers, the ones that face the congregation, is what I don't remember.
Okay, all right, very good. Well, I'm just going to jump into Full Compass here because I'm pretty familiar with their thing here, or their website. That's what they call it. So we're just going to jump into speakers here. You can see that they've parted them out a little bit. This is what we're looking for: install and fly mount speakers. Unless you're a mobile church, in which case you're going to be looking for portable powered speakers. We're going to say probably 12-inch speakers is what we're looking for. And yeah, you get into this horn-loaded stuff. I mean, it just gets crazy. So we are going to see if we can't figure out kind of an average here. So I'm going to go with this one, this Yamaha. It's a two-way. That's not a bad choice. And what I'm looking for is down in the specs. Okay, so I'm looking for a few things. I'm looking for how big the speaker cone is. Okay, that's generally speaking, the larger the cone, the louder it is. I'm also looking for, you know, what the RMS, or the average wattage used, is going to be, as well as the maximum, because from a power standpoint you need to know this so that you're not plugging in, you know, speakers that are drawing more power than your wall outlet can supply. But then I'm also looking for my coverage. Okay, dispersion also means coverage. So horizontally I get 90 degrees of coverage, and then vertically I get 40 degrees. So this covers a pretty broad range. And the problem with doing this is that it is going to probably hit off walls and that kind of thing. But as far as just a general speaker, I think it'll work well. What do you guys think? You think we should go with this one or keep looking?
Since no one else is talking, I'm just going to say it looks good to me, but I don't know anything about speakers, so ignore me.
Ah, fair enough, fair enough.
Jim,
Yeah.
I have a pretty big background in speakers. I used to do car audio.
Okay.
And I've gone from car audio to live audio and running the church sound, and it really depends on your room. You know, you talked about the loaded horn design, and that's going to be more effective in a smaller room, because what that gives is it gives it a time duration for the low frequencies to develop. So I don't know if you're going to speak to room size or anything like that, but it really is going to depend on your room.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, I'm not trying to say this is the go-to speaker. I'm just looking for an average price speaker, so we can get kind of a rough ballpark idea of what this whole thing is going to cost. But let's actually step back and let's look at those horn loaded. So let's go with this one. So there is a significant price difference there. Okay, that's a weather-resistant one. We don't need that. Unless you're meeting out in the outdoors up here in the Northwest. Oh, come on now. All right, so looks like the same dispersion pattern as the Yamaha. So, Rich, since you know more about speakers than I do, explain this idea of, you know, the time for the low frequencies to develop, and can you speak to that just a little bit?
Sure. Well, sound is a sine wave, and in order for your ear to be able to perceive a sound, it has to hear 1/4 of that sine wave. So if you are close to a vehicle or a source, you won't actually hear the bass and the low-end frequencies until you get farther away from it. So an example of this would be you're driving down the road and you hear this boom, boom, boom. You don't hear anything else until the car gets closer. and that's because it's got such a large sine wave. And so what the loaded horn does is it positions the speaker in the enclosure such that the sound has to travel around a distance to increase the distance from the cone to the listener's ear.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, well, I don't want to get bogged down on that, but
And really, that only speaks to the room size. If you've got a small room and you want a full, rich sound, this would be a good speaker. But if you've got a large room and it really doesn't matter, then any speaker any design would be fine.
sure. Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be the most difficult piece of equipment to really talk about because it is so dependent on, your room shape, your room dimensions, even the materials used in the construction, um, all of these things, the natural acoustics in the room. It's hard to just say go with this.
Yeah, Tim, another thing to maybe consider for your list, of like audio items
Mhm.
is, since speakers are so dependent on things, is, there might be a line item for like sound absorption material. Because, if you've got a plaster building with tile floors and wooden pews, you're going to have a lot of sound waves bouncing around in that room. So, putting some noise reduction or absorbing tiles on the wall or on the ceiling or that might be an option as well, besides just speaker type. I mean, I don't know that much about speakers, but I know that much about echoing and reflections.
Right. Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about is that this whole discussion is going to be balancing budget with need. And this is a conversation that a lot of people don't have because to them they're only focused on the budget. And in the long run, we talk about this almost every hangout, it's better to spend more on a quality piece of gear than to try and save money on a piece of junk. Because you're just going to be replacing that piece of junk, and that piece of junk is probably not the right solution for you anyway because it lacks certain features that you need, or it doesn't quite fill the function that you need, or you're trying to force it to fill a role that it was not designed to fill. I mean, there's any number of things or arguments as to why you get the right piece of equipment for the job.
Well, that's the thing I've seen that's kind of been the struggle with a lot of churches, small churches in particular. The budget tends to become a spaghetti test, as they call it. Somebody throws out a figure thinking, that's probably what we can spend, and then it's up to somebody to try to find what can fit that value. Whereas, really, most churches get it backwards. They need to identify what they need. That gives them a budget figure, and then they start trying to achieve and raise money to meet that budgetary figure. Because it's kind of like the old adage, it's better to save up and buy something and pay cash for it than it is to buy something on credit. Well, same thing on budget planning. It's best to identify the need, then set the budget.
Right. Exactly. So let's go back to the screen share here. And what do you guys think? For an average speaker price, should we be saying $700 per unit? Does that sound reasonable? Crickets.
You'd have to do a lot of research probably first.
Well, yes, of course.
It's hard to pick right quick.
Or should we just put a blanket $1,000 and...
Yeah, that's what I was leaning towards, is on average $500 per speaker, but I may be undercutting it because I don't know speakers that well. I may be taking the typical church approach of, ooh, that sounds expensive,
Right. Rich, what do you think?
When you're doing something like this, that's all you're doing is you're just guesstimating. So, I mean, really, you can put whatever number you want in there, because everything's going to vary so much. But if you want a starting number, $1,000 would definitely get you there.
Okay, great. All right, so in that case, Got that in there. Oops. Now that's funny. Actually put that on the right thing there. All right, so let's move on to audio mixers. So once again, we go in here, and we're going to go to what they're calling mixer consoles. And we're going to be looking for... So I'm going to focus on analog first. And we're going to be going... I'm just putting this out there. You guys tell me if you think I'm on the wrong track. That 16 channel on the high side.
Well, we're a similar sized church, and we just got a 16 channel mixer. Actually, we just got that Mackie that's up on the screen there. I think it's working out pretty well for us. We have, I think, 8 channels used, and we have 4 left over. Because on the Mackie, I think 4 of those inputs are stereo inputs.
Okay.
Yeah, and in our case, our current board is a 12 input, and a 16 input would probably be best. But you know, it's another one of those things. I think they bought a 12 because that was what was affordable at the time.
Right.
We have
So-
we have a similar sized church. It's probably 90 people on average attending. We actually have a Yamaha 24FX, and when a praise team is up, we can use all the channels.
Well, sure, that makes sense. And this is, again, what's hard about what I'm trying to do here is that different churches will have different needs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what might be a better thing to focus on is, instead of maybe the actual product, let's focus on the process of, what questions do we need to ask, what things do we need to think about, what conversations do we need to have, who do we need to talk to. Does that make sense? Because I think what's happening is we're getting bogged down in the details that are specific to each of us and our situations.
Yeah. So I guess what you're looking for, Tim, is before you pick a mixer, you need to talk to people and find out, on average, how many instruments do you use a week? How many people need to be mic'd at the same time? And once you kind of get those calculations and those values, that tells you the size board you need.
Right. Well, and that tells you what you need right now, but that doesn't tell you what you need 5 years down the road.
True. But it gives you your starting point.
Right. Exactly. So this is the bare minimum that we need. Okay, so...
The other thing to think about also is, like, we have 3AVN that's piped in, we have a DVD channel, we have a CD channel, and then we have a channel for the computer audio, as well as all the inputs for mics and instruments. So if you don't have a video switcher that switches the audio from all your video sources, you could end up with a lot of different channels being used for that. So, take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to summarize what Rich is saying, you have your local inputs, which would be, what resides in the booth itself or at the front of house mix position, as well as all the microphone inputs. And so those can add up really, really quickly. Absolutely. So I'm actually going to switch gears here a little bit. I'm going to go back and actually, let's do this. Let's just create a document. I can do that, right? Because I'm the moderator. So the other thing that was on our list, microphones. Let's talk microphones. Are you guys seeing any solid need for wired microphones? And if so, how are you seeing them used? What do you think the need is versus wireless?
I would say you want to have at least a couple of wired ones, if nothing else. And I'm sitting here thinking, I always think worst case scenario. What if you run out of batteries? What if there's some solar flare going on? All those sort of things can, drastically hurt wireless things. So I think it's good to have some wired mics. The question is how many is too many? I mean, once again, I know I'm going down the rabbit trail here, but our church started out with wired mics, so we have a good slew of them. But if you're building a system from the ground up, you don't want to overlook wired mics. I think you need to have a few for that worst case scenario.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if I guess it depends if we're talking about starting from scratch with the church, I think that I would recommend if they're budget conscious and anywhere you can use a wired mic, you're going to save at least 2/3 of the price probably for a good one. Now, of course, some churches are going to say, "Oh yeah, I found this great thing on Amazon that's $100." You go, not for a wireless mic, it's not for one that you'd want to use. You might use an SM58 for a wired mic that's around $100, but just keep that in mind that if it's a 2.4 gigahertz wireless mic from a company you've never heard of and it costs $50 to $100, that's probably not something you're going to want to try in your church. You're going to run into problems. So I guess that's what I was thinking was if we're talking a church plant here that's starting with nothing, maybe wired is the way to go for most of the mics, maybe not all of them.
I tend to agree. I want to just share something with you guys real quick. So if you're doing a search for wireless microphones on Amazon, we need to talk. Because, I mean, here's a Pile Pro wireless lab system for $11. Now, for $11, do you really think you're going to be getting good quality? I mean, there comes into the discussion at this point, the person's own common sense, I guess. They may think, oh, I can get 2 wireless mics for $169. Well, just because it's one of those things where it's like, if it sounds too good to be true, because I mean, let's just click on that. Let's look at the picture. Looks good. Looks professional. It's got a pretty little display there, and I don't know, it might work. It rates well.
Yeah, I was going to say I can personally speak to that. Back in 2008, we had a budget to do some small upgrades to our sound system, and we had some money left over. And all we had was our wired mics and one lapel mic. And I found a deal similar to this for that kind of price point, and I told the church, I said, hey, we got the money left in our budget. Buying something like this, it's going to be low quality. It's going to be a gamble. Do you want to take a chance on it? So they said yes, and we bought a set of mics like that. And they work, but they're very much prone to interference. In fact, I would be willing to bet if I did my research on the frequencies they're using, they're probably using frequencies that have since been quote-unquote banned by the FCC, I'm sure.
Oh, probably. I'll see if I can't figure that out. But in contrast, we have the pros. And there's really a handful of manufacturers of microphones that I would trust. As far as wireless microphones, you got your big ones. You got Sennheiser, Shure, Audio-Technica. Sony makes some. I have had mixed experience with them. But yeah, those are your big three. And then if you ever have the budget for electrosonics, go for it. That's all I have to say. But I mean, that is like the cream of the crop. That's the creme de la creme. You can't get better. There is no better system than electrosonics. But at thousands of dollars per system, not really part of this discussion. I did want to take a quick moment to point out one of the newer developments in wireless, and it's the Audio-Technica System 10. It's a 2.4 gigahertz. This is kind of the entry-level model, and I've been really impressed with the camera-mounted one that I have. But they also came out with a Pro version that they've been advertising. I don't think it's been released yet, but you can get up to 10 of those in a single area. So, and they're pretty reasonably priced. But Shure works fine. Sennheiser works great. I see a lot more churches, that I'm talking to going wireless. They like the freedom, they like the mobility, they like the cleanliness of it. There's a lot fewer trip hazards from microphones snaking or cables snaking across the stage. So it's a discussion that I think you guys in your own churches need to have. But yeah, I'm not going to tell you which way to go. My personal thing is if you can go wired, do it. But I also understand the argument for wireless. But if budget is an issue, then wired microphones are almost always going to be cheaper. I mean, I think that's a given. Let's see here. Let's move on to projection. So anything else in regards to audio that I didn't cover before we change categories?
I don't know. This could be another quagmire, but what about cables? There could be the temptation to buy quote-unquote cheap cables. Is there certain cables to not buy?
I'm actually glad that you asked that because there are. Let me pull some up for you. And I have a very highly scientific method for determining a good quality microphone cable, and I will share that with you. It's been lab tested. It's used all over the world, and yes, I'm being extremely facetious. So let me find an example of what not to get first. So let me share this. All right. So Amazon, of course, again. Now you can get good stuff from Amazon. Any of the Amazon basic cabling, I've never had a problem with it, and it's pretty reasonably priced. So the way that I kind of help not justify, but differentiate good quality cabling from bad quality cabling is really with the connector. And this may be a little difficult to see. It is a metal chassis, but right back here you have what's called a rubber boot. And I have had no end of problems with cables that utilize this particular connector. It generally means it signifies that it's just a low quality cable. In contrast to that, we have cabling that utilizes this connector. Now, can you guys see the new window here?
Yep.
Yes, no, maybe so. Yes, you can. Okay, good. So what we have here is we still have a rubber boot, but it's a hard plastic, and this is actually modular, so that you can actually take it apart, which allows you to check your connections on the back of the pins here and put it back together. So if one comes off, you don't have to rip the whole thing apart. And getting the rubber boot off the other one, the first one that I showed you, impossible. I mean, once you get it out of there, it's not coming back, or it's not going back in. Whereas this one, we just recently had a connector here. This part here, where it locks, got mangled, and I had to replace it. And I had some of these just sitting in a bag, and I just had to replace this chassis piece because this rear piece was compatible. So I like modular stuff. It works really well for me. Neutrik is the industry standard as far as making cable connectors, and you can see here that it's very similar. You know, the GLS plug boot back here is a little longer, but it is very similar, and I can speak to the fact that they are compatible with each other. So that's really what I use as far as audio cables. That process or that method has never let me down. I'm something of a more, I don't know, advanced operator, let's say, just because I do solder my own cables. I do have the equipment to do it. I know how to do it. So, you know, the average volunteer isn't necessarily going to have that that skill set, if you will. So, if you can help them at any point in either providing them resources to learn how to do that, or providing them simple things like, you know, a modular connector that allows them easier access to the cable itself and the connections, I think that's probably the better way to go. And I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, I mean, definitely helps. I mean, even if you don't have a volunteer that's skilled at repairing the cable, it'll make the repair guy you come in much happier.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, but the main thing I was thinking about, I guess, when I was asking the question, which it's probably obvious to most of us on this Hangout, but it may not be to the viewers, is, you know, when you're speccing out an audio system and getting cables, do you go with balanced cables or unbalanced cables? Because the example you showed is balanced. Anything with a 3-prong connector is a balanced cable. So is it definitely an advantage to go balanced versus unbalanced?
I like XLR connections. They lock. They're easy to work with. It's a standard. There's just so many pros to using them. The issue comes in when you have unbalanced sources and you want to go to a balanced input on the board. At that point, that's where usually you get a direct box involved, and there are various manufacturers of those. Sound is one of those areas where you really don't want to skimp on the quality, because, you know, the lighting can flake out from week to week. Not a big deal. The projectors or the projection system can glitch every once in a while, but and it'll be okay. But if the sound has a 60 cycle hum, or if you have a wireless microphone that's cutting in and out, I mean, sound issues are the most noticeable and the most, I don't want to say recognized, but the most, like, unforgivable. It's like people know when something goes wrong with the sound. And even if something goes wrong in another department, you know, if the projector is glitching, who do they look at? They look at the sound guy, because they think he runs everything. So I would say that if you're going to put money in anywhere, just starting out, put it in audio. Yeah, that's a good point, Charles. I'll put up a comparison here. So
yeah, while you're getting that comparison, that's why I kind of asked the question. For me, it's a rhetorical question. I mean, if I was speccing out a new system, I'd go with those 3-prong XLR connectors, no matter what. But, you know, to the average person starting out, I mean, you can go get a PA system at Radio Shack with microphones that look like they have headphone jacks, and you might think, oh, this is a great deal. and you need to understand why that's not a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So is this what you were looking for? Kind of a side-by-side?
Exactly, yeah, side by side, so that it illustrates the difference between the three-prong being a balanced connector, which is muy bueno, versus what looks like a giant headphone jack is an unbalanced connector, which is not good for microphones. When you're dealing with instruments, you may have no choice, because that's what the instrument provides, but
right.
Yeah, you want to stick with balanced as much as possible.
Oh, no, I agree.
But just to make things a little more murky, the picture you're showing, Tim, though, isn't that both ends are in fact balanced, because it's a stereo connection, so it has 3 conductors. So it's a tip ring sleeve. It's not
you're right.
a 2 connection. So that might make things even more confusing if you're not clear. I don't know if this is the way it is all over the country, but I know that my local Radio Shack, which I used to work at right after seminary, it has gone out of business. And so it could be the case that a lot of churches are going to start getting their systems from Amazon as opposed to getting them from Radio Shack. Neither of which are necessarily good choices when you're going with the cheapest possible. Amazon, though, has higher quality stuff. It's just hoping that the people that make the decisions go for it, for the higher quality stuff, if they're going to go getting it from there. So.
Right. So here is what we are talking about, more or less. So you can see, I mean, it's not a 1/4 inch to 1/4 inch, but it's still the TRS concept versus the TS. So TRS stands for tip ring sleeve, and you have a left, right, and a shield wire that is coming into the back here. So tip, ring, sleeve, and that provides you your stereo sound, your left and your right, which is why you see there's only one bar or one strip here, and that is because while both cables here have 2 wires going into the connector, one of those wires is shared, so they both have a sleeve connector, and then they also have their right and left, or vice versa. So if you're going into an unbalanced connection and you want stereo, you're going to have to use 2 connectors. Everybody agree with that? Yes. Okay. Good. I mean, I'll see if I can't find something a little more representative of what we're talking about. There we go. I just didn't look down far enough. All right. So let me blow that up. So here you can clearly see 2 rings, and then you see 1 ring. So make sure that you know what you're getting, and also make sure that you know what you need. Because more people have not intentionally messed this up, but they've purchased a TS cable when they needed a TRS and vice versa, and that can lead to some pretty annoying issues. So, everybody okay moving on?
Seems good to me.
Okay, so projection. Let's talk projectors. Oh, you know what I forgot on that list? I forgot the screen. That's hysterical. How did I do that? My goodness. So
we'll just make sure to paint the wall white and we're good. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, actually, since you brought that up, let's just go to the screen. Tell me why that is not a good idea.
Could be the texture of your wall. I mean, if you decide to paint your wall white and your wall has, wooden beams every few inches, it's going to create a weird pseudo 3D effect to your projection. I mean, that's a worst case scenario.
There's also the issue of reflectivity. If you're spending good money on a really good projector and you're just shooting that up against the wall, you've basically thrown away some of your money, because some of that light is not going to reflect back. So you spent extra money that if you'd put it on the screen, you could have saved money on the projector and gotten the same quality image, and it would have perhaps been a little sharper or smoother or looked a little bit better in general.
True. I will agree with that. And the reason for that, now it's my turn to shine, is because there is no projection screen material on the planet available today that can add more light intensity than is being projected onto the screen itself. The best it can do is focus that light energy down a particular axis. So you may have heard terms like high gain screen being thrown around. Well, what that means is that it's taking all of that light energy that's hitting the screen and it's focusing it right back down the axis that it's, that the projector basically is throwing it the light energy from. So it's great if you sit in the middle, but if you have a wide room, the people on the sides are practically seeing nothing, depending on the angle at which they're seeing the screen. So the research that I did or have done indicates that, generally speaking, a piece of white paper in front of a white projection screen will appear gray on a high gain screen from 0 degrees, okay, so right in front of the screen. At, I think, 12 degrees off axis, the screen and the paper appear the same. They both appear white. 30 degrees off axis, the piece of paper looks white and the screen looks gray. So that's how quickly that angle change can affect how bright the image is. So what you're looking for in a screen is one that matches your room. If you have a really long, narrow space, then a high gain screen is probably going to be good for you. And that means you can get away with the lower power projector. So instead of, say, a 6,000 lumen projector, you can get away with a 4,500. Okay? So if you have a wide room, then you're going to need a screen material that is going to have a lower gain number, because unity gain would be around 1.0 gain. But it has a much wider viewing cone, is what we call it, and you're looking for that angle when you're doing your research. So the idea is that you get the brightest screen material that you can with the widest screen cone, so that more people can see it, basically. And not only that they see it, but they see the same image. It's not the people in the middle see the brightest image and the people on the side see, something. They see an image, but it's not. It doesn't have good contrast. It doesn't have high brightness, that kind of thing. Everybody sees the same. So that's the importance of screens. It's not just throw anything up there and then compensate by getting, the brightest projector that you can. Make sense? I know that we kind of talked about this about a month ago, month and a half, somewhere in there. We actually had a hangout just on projections. So,
that's why I'm kind of keeping silent. It's kind of like, let's mention the other hangout and kind of keep going.
Right, exactly. Forgive me, I had to post something on my other computer. So, now we can talk about projectors. And now we're going to get into the conversation about resolution. We're going to get talking about lumens. We're going to be talking about connections. So I'm going to have Charles chime in, because I know you have a projection system. You have a single screen over on the left side of the room. Do you know what resolution you're projecting at?
Not specifically. I know it's one of the lower widescreen resolutions, but it's not quite 720p. It's kind of a weird resolution because of the way our screen got remounted in a remodel, but I'll save that horror story.
All right, so kind of the standard these days is XGA, which, if my memory serves me correctly, is 1024 by 768. Not quite the 1280 by 768. That is 720. So it's a little smaller than 720. So that may be what you're at, Charles, is XGA. But shopping for projectors and doing your research on projectors can be really, really not scary, but it can be really tricky. That's the word. And the reason for that is because you may see a really great price on a 6,000 lumen projector, so that's really bright for a small church. But where they get you is the resolution. So you have a trade-off that you have to decide what's most important. So is it important to have a higher resolution than it is to have a high brightness, or is it better to have high brightness and a lower resolution? Well, the answer to that will depend on what you're putting on the screen. If you're putting video content on the screen, then you can probably, get away with whatever the highest resolution of the video it is that you're going to be putting on the screen. If, however, you're doing just PowerPoint stuff that's, data heavy, as we call it, then resolution is probably going to be the bigger priority. Now, if you want to project in 1080p, doesn't really matter. Or if you're going to be sending 1080p video to your screen, that'll be fine for data. But if you're going to be sending 640p or 720 by or 480p, there we go. Got to get my resolutions right. To the video or to the screen, you probably don't need WUXGA or 1080p or even 720p. So you really got to know what you're going to be sending to it ahead of time before you go and buy, spend money on something. The other consideration to have is ambient light. Now, Charles, again, I'm going to come back to you because I know your room. You have fluorescent lighting. You have a fair amount of ambient light in your space. How does that affect the screen?
Oh, it definitely affects the screen. In fact, we have an overabundance of fluorescent lighting. And that kind of goes back to the horror story I have about the remodel. We had people that wanted to remodel our sanctuary to make it brighter and more open and more inviting because we had originally had paneling in there, and they took the paneling off and there was sheetrock underneath the paneling, and they textured it and painted it a off-white color. And the off-white color combined with the bright fluorescent lighting really hurt our projection. So right now we're in a position where our projector doesn't seem as bright as it could be because painting the walls the color that we painted them kind of, quote-unquote, shot ourselves in the foot, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the biggest issue that you're having right now, in addition to that, is the fact that you just have all of this light and you can't control it.
Exactly. We got light everywhere.
Right. And maybe while we're on the subject, you can pull up a picture of your room so that people that are not familiar with it can actually see it in action, see what it looks like. I'm actually going to go back to my list here. So we're talking about projectors. Lumens, if you're unfamiliar with the term, you can Google it. It's a measure of the brightness of the projector itself. Generally speaking, the higher the lumen count, the brighter it is and the better it is. You're also looking for contrast ratio. We also had a hangout dedicated to projector technology. So, what is it? What is the technology behind the projector? What's creating the image to begin with? And I would say that kind of the industry standard these days is DLP. and that generally has the best contrast ratio. So you can go with LCD. Based on the research I did, I'm a little more gun shy to pull the trigger on an LCD just because it uses an organic material that does degrade over time. And in fact, I have a client who has an auditorium that uses an LCD projector, and the blue LCD is actually dying. It's going out, and it's not pretty. I mean, it completely ruins the projected image, and we're actually in talks right now about how we upgrade that and that kind of thing. So here is Charles's room. So you can see the fluorescent banks here. You can see that there are some downlights on the background at the front of the church. There's fluorescent lighting on the sides. So he has a lot of ambient indirect lighting. And what that means is that he can't control it. And so the effect of that is it washes out the screen. And it makes it just difficult to read. That's really the issue. Now you guys are saying you're still seeing me, which is weird because I've white boxed Charles. Let me try that again. Is that working any better? Charles, why don't you unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm unmuted.
All right. I don't know if that's working any better, but no bueno. Okay, well, maybe that's just not working.
I could sit here and lightly whistle while you talk.
That's all right. Why don't you email that to me, and I'll put it up on my screen and see if I can't get that to work.
Okay, just a moment.
Yeah, so basically what's happening is he has a whole bunch of light that's coming up into the ceiling from the sides. He's got light coming down from the ceiling into the audience. He's got, and we'll get the picture up for you guys, but he's got a background of kind of like rock work, and he's got downlight on that, and so he's got all of these sources of light that's just bouncing everywhere. So much like audio waves from a speaker just kind of bounce off whatever surface they come into contact with. Unless they're absorbed, he's got rays of light energy just going everywhere, and so a lot of that's falling onto the screen, and because the screen material is not designed, the particular screen he has is not designed to reject ambient light as well as some current products on the market. It's just washing out the image. And the final piece of the puzzle is that he doesn't have a bright enough projector to really just punch through that ambient light to really produce an amazing, clear, crisp, good dynamic range image. Now, it's still readable, but it's not as readable as it could be. And every church is on a journey. And you're not going to knock it out of the park the first time, and you're going to buy stuff that you wish you didn't. I mean, I've done it. Everybody does it. So don't beat yourself up, and be honest and transparent with your leadership ahead of time. Before you buy anything, just say, look, I've done the research. I've talked to the people that know what they're talking about. This is what they recommended. But it may not be right for us. And if that happens, we'll deal with that. If that's a product return to get something else, if we're going to use this for the time being until, we can afford something else, I don't know. But whatever that situation is going to be, it's got to be right for you. But yeah, don't hammer yourself, and don't let other people, rake you over the coals for making an honest mistake. So, with that being said, still waiting for that email to come in.
Yeah, actually, Tim, I sent you it in a separate Hangout window.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did that. It was a little faster than email.
Sure. Well, let me pull it up real quick then. Let's see. There it is.
And Tim, let's not hesitate to remind people that it's not just overhead lights In fact, in Charles's case, if he could convince the right people to turn off those overhead lights, it might be okay. But if you've got windows,
Yes,
beautiful stained glass windows that are 200 years old, you might have huge problems with projection.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
So here you
yeah.
can see, hopefully.
Yeah, I was going to say, in my case, guys, correct me if I'm wrong here, but probably the biggest benefit to help the projection screen is if we could rearrange the way that our fluorescent lights are controlled by the switch. So like right now, we've got 3 switches. One controls the far left bank of lights, one controls the 2 banks of lights in the center, and one light switch controls the far right bank of lights. If that was changed to more of a front, middle, and back part of the section of the church, as far as those light switches work, that probably would help us, correct?
It might.
I don't think it could hurt.
No, not at all.
Unless there's someone that would then complain that it's too dark and the Lord himself hates darkness, and that happens sometimes in churches.
Indeed, indeed. So that's Charles's situation. Yes, it is readable. It is, I can see words are on there, and if I was in the space, I could probably read those.
Yeah, the words are readable. It's when we play videos is where we got to start cutting out lights, because videos
Right.
always moving videos project darker than static words on the screen.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, we kind of have a similar setup in our church where we have the projector screen in the center, and then we have spotlights on the stage, which the projector screen is above, and then we have 2 side lights and then one in the center. So when the projector is on and the spotlight is on at the same time, the projector screen is really washed out because the spotlights are too bright. So when we do videos or anything like that, we have to turn all the lights off so that the video is clear.
Yeah, that's a very common problem, actually. Not something that's oh shoot, I just did a double negative. Uh, you can overcome that problem is the point that I'm trying to make. And once we get into lighting, we'll go ahead and take a look at some ways that you can do that. But as far as keeping this moving, we're running out of time.
Yeah, we may have to break this off into part 2 for next week.
Yeah, I know, right? So let's talk about how you drive content to the projector, okay? And that's kind of twofold. So that requires a computer, generally speaking, because even if you're doing image magnification where you're sending live video to the projector, chances are at some point you're going to be projecting data, slides or lyrics or something like that. So we're talking about the computer, and we're talking about signal distribution. So how do we get it from the computer or the source that's providing the imagery to the projector? So because Charles and Paul are so much more well versed in computer stuff, I'm going to let them kind of take the lead on this. So let's talk about hardware first, and then we'll talk about what software options are available. And keep in mind that we did actually do a hangout on that covered software specifically, from the free side to the creme de la creme of ProPresenter. So whoever wants it, take it.
Well, I think the first thing we need to talk about is whether it's a Mac or a PC, it doesn't matter as much these days as maybe it used to in the old days, in that you've got some choices of how you get the signal out of the computer. A lot of churches will default to HDMI because when you're at home, you plug in your Blu-ray player or your set-top box into your HDMI port on your display. It's 3 to 6 feet away. 1 to 2 meters if you're not in the US. So it's not very far, and it's very reliable, and it's nice. Unfortunately, when it comes to doing that in a church where you have longer distances, HDMI is not as reliable. There are ways to get around that problem, but as Tim has noticed in some of his installations, sometimes even the ways to get around the problem don't work. So I always recommend to people steer clear of HDMI because the spec actually says 10 meters, and 10 meters is 32 or 33 feet. So if where the computer is, up the wall, across the ceiling, and down to where the projector is, if that total distance is longer than 30 feet, then you're going to run into problems. And so that's why I typically recommend that people don't do that. And that's all centered around the fact that HDMI is designed for copy protection, to keep you from stealing content from Blu-ray movies and such, which is fine for that, but in a professional setting like the church, it's really problematic. So DVI, VGA even tend to be much more reliable ways to get it from point A to point B. You wouldn't typically use SDI, but that would be a great way to do it too. More often than not, you see people that say, well, it used to work, and then it doesn't. After so many months, usually sometime after it goes out of warranty, you have a problem where something goes a little bit different. It was just barely working, and for digital, if it barely works, then it works beautifully, and if it just barely doesn't work, it doesn't work at all. So that's one thing that I want to talk about and want to caution people with, is the connection really matters.
Charles?
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that with Paul as well, and I think we're at a critical juncture as far as interface types. It also could be a problematic juncture. The age-old standard of getting information from a computer to a projector was always VGA for years and years and years. And that's where we are in our church currently, is VGA. And if I had to pick it between like VGA, DVI, or HDMI, I'm right in there with Paul. I would pick DVI probably out of those three standards. One, because it's more reliable than HDMI, because HDMI has its copy protection issues. And also because DVI is a digital signal versus VGA is an analog signal. And digital signals are typically a lot less prone to long cable run interferences as analog cable types are. So that's why I would lean towards DVI. But the challenge that we're running into in today's society is computers, like new laptops that are coming out with either what's called a DisplayPort connector, and that's it, or they come out with a HDMI connector, and that's it. And if I was buying a laptop these days, I would probably lean to a laptop that actually has a DisplayPort connector over an HDMI connector, because DisplayPort you can actually convert to VGA or DVI very easily with an adapter. So if you were looking to have a cross cable platform solution for when you have like a visiting speaker that absolutely insists on using their laptop and not the laptop you've got on your church, having a setup where you can adapt cable types without running into issues is probably the best thing to have. So yeah, if I was building out a new system, I'd probably run DVI to my projector, and I'd make sure I'd have a DVI to DisplayPort adapter or a HDMI to DVI adapter. Those are the kind of adapters I'd look at. Yeah, you might run into somebody that has an older laptop that still only has VGA, and you can get adapters that will convert VGA to DVI or HDMI, but they're a lot more problematic because you're going from analog to digital. So in those situations, if somebody came to me with an old VGA laptop and all I had was DVI, I'd probably insist on them using our church laptop. That's just me. So hopefully I didn't go too far down the rabbit trail with some of the different cable types there.
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. That's part of what makes. Oops. Yeah. Okay. Good. I thought I was muted there for a second. That's part of what makes these Hangouts really cool. Is that we get that on the ground perspective, if you will, not just this. I am the all-seeing system integrator, and I know what's best for everybody. But we get that real week-to-week feedback, which is great. The one advantage between DVI and HDMI that DVI has that nobody really mentioned was the fact that you can lock the connector. You can screw it in just like a VGA, whereas HDMI, there's no locking HDMI connector that I know about on the market, and so it's very easy to pull it out. It's very dependent on being pushed in all the way. It's very similar to, say, an Ethernet cable that I ran into the other day at a facility. The little retention pin had been broken off, and so it didn't stay in its socket all the way. And if it wasn't in all the way, it didn't work. No internet, and it was incredibly frustrating because it's such an easy thing. I mean, I field terminated RJ45s till I'm blue in the face, all day for 3 days straight. I mean, it's not a difficult thing. You get good at it, you can do it in a minute. But here it was, a really bad situation that could really, imagine if that was on a computer that handled your live streaming. You bump the computer, the connection is lost, your stream is gone, and you may not even know about it. So you gotta use the right connectors, and use the one that's going to be best. And right now, for me, DVI is it. It is digital. You get higher resolution with DVI than you get with VGA, and so that's important. So, and then also, yes, I have had no end of trouble with HDMI bail-in systems or HDMI extenders. And a lot of it stems from the electrical system that I am plugging these things into. For whatever reason, HDMI bail-ins in particular are very susceptible to electrical fluctuations in that system. Whatever's in the church. And so you get a fluctuation. It doesn't matter. I've seen it happen. It's plugged into a power conditioner, a power strip, whatever. The only thing I haven't tried is a battery backup. And as soon as that fluctuation hits, the signal is lost to the projectors, and it'll come back, but it won't be solid. It'll go in and out until you power cycle the system. And I'm sorry, that's not okay with me. And I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing that's not right, because I know that HDMI bail-ins are going into churches and other facilities all over the world, and they're working just fine. They're bulletproof. So it may be something that I'm doing wrong. I'm in the process of looking at that, but right now I've not found one that works really, really well, except for an Intellix unit, and that went into a newer building that probably was grounded properly and that kind of thing. So,
yeah, and Tim, to piggyback on your difficulty there, that's the thing with a digital connection versus an analog connection. A digital connection is actually a two-way connection that kind of negotiates how to display the image, versus analog, it just kind of puts it out there, and what you see is what you get. So as you can kind of see here, I've screen shared the display types that we're talking about, because I'm a visual person, and sometimes hearing this terminology, it's alphabet soup. But if you start over on the far right, the square blue connector, that's the VGA. That's an analog connection. It's the tried and true connection type that's been on computers for ages. To the left of that is a white connector that is a DVI connection, and I will point out an interesting difference here. This DVI connector, it has all these different little pins and a slat on the right-hand side. Well, when you see a DVI connector like this that has just a slat, that means it is a digital-only connection. You cannot convert that connector type to something else. If this DVI connector had the slat with like 2 pins above it and 2 pins below it, that's actually a DVI connector that you can hook up an adapter to and down convert it back to VGA. And it'll see that adapter and make that translation. So that's something to keep in mind when you see a DVI connector with just a slat and not the pins on the top and the bottom. It's a digital-only connection. To the left of that, the one that kind of looks like a square with some corners ate out of it, that's the HDMI connector. That is, of course, the bane of everyone's existence on this Hangout. And then to the far left is the lesser-known display port. It's actually, I believe, a display standard that was started out by IBM before they sold their laptop business to Lenovo. And it's actually, like I said, it's kind of the underdog, but it's kind of a powerhouse. It looks almost like an HDMI connector, except it only has one corner ate out of its connector, if you will. It will lock. Most of the connectors do lock. And like I say, a DisplayPort connector you can buy very affordably. DisplayPort adapters that convert from DisplayPort to HDMI, DisplayPort to DVI, DisplayPort to VGA. I mean, you could probably convert it to a teleporter one of these days. I don't know, but it's actually a underdog powerhouse connector. I've definitely become a fan of it. When I first got it on a laptop, I'm like, what is this goofy thing? But I've definitely fell in love with it.
Yeah, DisplayPort is a pretty cool little technology, that's for sure. And then there is a little brother to that, mini DisplayPort, that's been on MacBooks and MacBook Pros for forever. Where was I going? Hang on a second. I got to consult my notes here because I'm trying to keep up. It had something to do with projectors here. Oh, right. Okay. So going back to projectors really quickly, I wanted to point out that when you're looking at the specs on a projector, it's important that you look at the native resolution. Because a lot of times what will happen is the projector itself does have some scaling capability. So it can take a certain resolution in and can scale that to a larger resolution, let's say. But that doesn't mean that it's going to do it particularly well. They are getting better, but what you're going to be looking at is native resolution, because that's where your imagery is going to be the sharpest, it's going to be the cleanest, you're going to get the best image. So I just wanted to pop that in there before I forgot about it. So yeah, we've talked about connection types, we've talked about resolution. Let's talk about how we get the signal from here to there. We've mentioned balins and extenders. For those that aren't familiar with those terms, those are little devices. They usually come in pairs, and it basically converts a signal and runs it over a Cat5 or a Cat6 cable, and then converts it back to the original signal format to connect to your projector or your TV or whatever device it is that you're connecting it to. It's a really efficient way of transporting signals. You generally will get at least 100, 200, 250 feet distance before it needs to be reamplified or something like that. And for a small church, that's going to do it. It's not very often that you're going to have to go all the way around the church and go hundreds and hundreds of feet. And if you have to do that, you're probably going to have to be looking at a similar product, but instead of converting it to Cat5, Cat6, it converts it to fiber. And you can run those for miles. So I don't know. Am I missing anything on getting cable or getting the image from here to there? Generally, what I've found is wired HDMI. If you're going to go HDMI, you can run it wired over 100-foot cables. They do make them. They're fairly reasonably priced. they're not susceptible in the same way as HDMI extenders. So I've seen wired 100-foot HDMI runs work very well in 2 different churches where HDMI balance did not. So, I mean, I agree with Paul. You know, the spec says, what was it, 10 meters? Yeah, okay. So, you know, bear that in mind, but I have seen up to 100 feet work. Is there anything else on projection that you guys want to talk about? I feel like I'm forgetting something.
Well, let's talk about aspect ratio just real quick, because you can still buy 4x3 screens, you can still buy 4x3 projectors, and there might be occasions where those are okay. I really feel like in 2015, you're not buying equipment for today, you're buying it for the next however long you want to last until you replace it. So add that amount of time to today's day and think to yourself, okay, will I be content to have a screen that's 4x3 projecting at 800 by 600 in 2020 or 2025? I really can't imagine that anyone would say yes to that. So I think I would recommend in general that you think, well, if every TV you can buy right now is 16 by 9, if the next possible standard is either UHD or 4K, depending on who you talk to and what they call it, and those are both widescreen formats. If every computer you buy nowadays has a widescreen, should you be buying a projector that has a 4x3 screen? So at least ask yourself the question. Just don't default to the 4x3 projector because it's cheaper. Just at least ask yourself that, because I just don't want to hear in 2 years, oh man, I wish I'd heard that, Paul, but I didn't even know to ask it. So ask yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Great point. I think you covered that pretty well. I don't think I need to summarize or add my 2 cents to it. The only thing I'm going to say is aspect ratio refers to height in relation to width. So 4:3 is the old television broadcasting standard, which is why it was more square, versus this more common now 16 by 9 widescreen. So I mean, you and I could talk aspect ratios for the next hour because there's so many of them, but let's not confuse the issue, right? 4:3, 16:9, that's pretty much what people need to know. What's interesting, though, I got to do the math on this real quick, but I believe that no, I'm wrong. Okay, never mind. I was going to say that I thought that the 720p was 4:3, but it's not. It's XGA that's 4:3. That's right. So 1024. Oops, I gotta actually get back to my calculator. 1024 divided by 768 is a 1.33 aspect ratio, and we take 4 divided by 3, same thing. So there you go. So just because you have an XGA resolution that's higher than, say, 640 by 480 doesn't necessarily mean higher resolution is not synonymous with aspect ratio. So the really easy way to figure that out is to take the first number divided by the second, and that will give you a decimal. So 1.33333 and all that is 4:3. 1.78 is the widescreen decimal number. And it goes up from there. It goes to 2.35, 2.35. It goes to 2.85 for, I mean, that's like really, really thin. So, but yeah, just know what you're getting, I think is kind of the overarching point, to kind of put a cap on this. What I guess will be part one. We'll do part two next week, where we'll talk about an actual video system, live streaming, and lighting. So do your research, because you need to know what you're going to get, and what it's going to do for you and how it's going to do that. And if that means a lot more research, if that means a lot more time than you have to invest in it, then it may be time to think about reaching out to somebody that does have the time and does have the experience and does have the expertise in doing this. Because I guarantee you it's going to be a much better use of your money, or the church's money, to hire somebody who knows what they're doing to come in and kind of just do all this for you, than it is to buy the wrong equipment now, and then 6 months, a year down the road, you're going through this process again, in which case you're probably going to be hiring a professional anyway. So that's my 2 cents. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I think that's a great point. That I think this is something that churches which are really trying to save money sometimes skimp on, and I've been there, I've done it. But if it comes down to you buy the totally wrong system, did you really save money? So there are some system integrators that make their money off the equipment. There are some that make their money off the installation. If you need to have it installed anyway, maybe that's just the way to go. Find someone that, and maybe the one that makes the money off the equipment, maybe he gets a better deal on it and just sells it to you at what you would have paid if you'd bought it from B&H anyway. So it's absolutely possible that you won't even spend much more money than you would have spent, and you'll get it done right the first time. Just do your research, absolutely, because not all system integrators are equal. I wouldn't say that I'm the best at it. I've done a few systems, but that's not where my area of expertise lies. Tim, I think, is better at it, but there are companies that do $10 million systems all the time, and maybe they're outside your price range, but maybe there's someone that does do smaller systems that's perfect for you. So if you find out that you've saved the price of your system and you don't have to upgrade it for 10 years because you bought right the first time, that's better stewardship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. And, I think that there's room here to talk about the importance of having a good synergy with somebody that you decide to reach out to, that you potentially bring in to do a consult, to do training, to do install, whatever it is. There is no one size fits all. I will warn you that in the system integration and installation industry, there are individuals out there that are affectionately termed trunk slammers by the pros, and those are the guys that they have the equipment in their car, and they will sell you a system, and they'll install it, and it will usually take a day, and then they're going to be on the road. You never hear from them again. So, from a support standpoint, who do you call? Well, you can call the manufacturer. That may or may not work for you, but you're not going to have that local support. And the other issue is that they're going to sell you whatever they have in their car. They're not really concerned about designing a system for you and you alone that is specific and unique to your space and to your particular church. And you may get a sound system that produces sound, and you may get a system that produces sound reasonably well, but you will never know how good a system can sound until you get one that's specifically tailored for your space. You'll never understand how good a projection system can look until you get one that's tailored for your, your space, and so on and so forth. So, this is not advertising me. I don't have the bandwidth to serve all of you. I'm sorry, but chances are I can hook you up with somebody that is more local to you, that will provide you really great service when you need it, instead of paying for somebody to fly across the country to you, for example, or trying to troubleshoot via Google Hangouts or video conference or Skype or over the phone. So just think about those things. Local support is a really big deal, because when it's Friday afternoon and your soundboard died, where are you going to turn? You need to figure that out now, and not that Friday afternoon. So that's what I got to say. We're up against the clock. Anybody else? I think Charles says he doesn't have anything else. Charles, LaJuan, do you guys have anything to add?
Nope, but good info.
All right. All right. Well, with that, we will see you next week for part 2. And be looking for that invite. Thanks for watching, YouTube viewers out there. I see you. And actually, if you are watching live, please send me a message on Google+, comment on the event page, on the YouTube page. Just let me know who you are. We'd love to know more about you. We'd love to know if you have any questions that we can answer next week. And we'd love to just engage with you to make sure that you're getting the information that you want and that you need. So with that, we'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.